Just for the listeners, Bill Ryan is in Ecuador and doesn't have the bandwidth to do video, so he is going to be on audio only. You will just see his picture, but he's very much there. Bill Ryan, why don't you say hello to everyone?
Hello to everyone. It's 10 o'clock at night in Ecuador. I just managed to get my internet connection working literally 5 minutes before 7 o'clock Pacific time. We had the internet guys here climbing a tree to get the antenna dish as high as possible, and all kinds of dramas going on here, and I'm delighted that it's worked.
Okay, great. And so now we're starting. So I'm sorry for the delay. I hope everyone on live stream can hear us. I'm going to rely to some degree on Tommy and the people listening to tell us if we're having broadcasting issues, which hopefully we are not. I'm going to try to pull up a live stream on my other computer without the sound, so I can see what we're looking, if we're actually coming across, and if there is any problem, please. Actually, now I know that they are doing commercials. That's really unfortunate. I thought they didn't do commercials during the broadcast, so maybe I should have paid for this channel this time, but we're kind of low on funds. So I do want to start this out by saying that we are accepting donations, the Project Camelot, and I also want to put a pitch in there for helping David Wilcock with his work. And then if anyone wants to support Bill Wood, his email address is available on the interview page on Project Camelot Productions. And you can get there by clicking on the front page of Project Camelot. And that way you can write to him and find out about donating to him. He didn't have time to actually arrange for a donation button per se. So I'm hopeful that we are broadcasting well and live, and it looks like we are. Going to enlarge this so I can actually see if the people are saying anything. Okay, yeah, and the questions are already coming kind of fast and furious on the chat. Okay, great. So at this point, everyone knows that the primary person here is Bill Wood. This is not his real name. For anyone who has not listened to the interview before watching this, you should have done your homework. But if you didn't, it's okay. We will be going over many, many things here. One of the things that I want to start out with is asking Bill Wood to explain to people about his top secret or above top secret clearance, because we have a number of Navy SEALs out there who are basically going haywire because they feel that they're getting a bad name, et cetera, et cetera. And Bill Wood has been a Navy SEAL. I have his records in hand, and the above top secret clearance is not visible on these records, and there's a reason for that. And actually, I'll let Bill Wood explain to everyone. So go right ahead.
Okay. Basically, what I want to say to everybody out there who's doubting, my credentials and what I did in the military, all I can say is I'm completely fine with that. Because I don't have evidence that there is a SEAL Team 9. I think it's pretty plausible that people recognize that the Navy didn't just forget the number 9 when they were making SEAL teams. And up until very recently, SEAL Team 6 didn't exist either. So there's a lot about what I did that is considered above top secret. And I'm sure everybody would agree that after 9/11, that those records were probably scrubbed clean from ever existing. So that's what I have to say about that. I would like to recognize that after my interview, I did have the opportunity to talk to David after that. And David and I have since talked for many, 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 many hours. And
that's correct.
We were absolutely thrilled to find out that we have been working in tandem without ever knowing it. And that when we compared notes, we were strangely thrilled that what he's been doing with his work and what I've been doing with my work were jiving together now. And we have since been able to get a lot of work done. And what I have been working on.
Okay, Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. I'm going to have to sort of have something of a moderator's stance in this sort of free-for-all question-answer sequence. I need to cover this Navy SEAL issue a little bit more here. We spoke earlier today, and you did explain that there are Navy SEALs out there that have a vested interest in not seeing this information get out, and people listening need to understand that. I want you to address that issue a little more, if you don't mind, and explain to people who will not know and don't understand why various Navy SEALs who did not have above top secret clearances, first of all, would not know about you, and second of all, have a vested interest in keeping you quiet.
Okay, well, that's an easy explanation. What I've been getting in emails is people have been looking up BUDS training records, Basic Underwater Demolition School. My records for BUDS are not going to be public information. Flat out, just the way it is. Can't make it be any other way. Sorry. We had 9/11, and there's a reason for that. If you want to believe the popular story, that's fine. If you want to look at the evidence and understand physics and know that buildings just can't fall down the way they fell down during 9/11, then I can't help you. But we need to realize that most special forces people, after they leave the service, work as contractors for the government or for the military in some way. And they are dedicated, and they very much are, what's a good word? Dependent, I guess, on the paycheck. And the contractors that come out of the special forces make lots and lots and lots of money. And if wars go away, paychecks go away.
I guess I'll also say here that I have plugged Bill into the Insiders Network that I'm a part of, which has expanded. And I was able to put him in touch with people who would have eaten him for breakfast if he was fake. And they were very impressed.
Yeah, Carrie kind of cut me off before I got to that story, but I would like to share some information that when David and I talked, we figured out. The reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is because back in 2008, when I was living in Las Vegas, I was contacted / introduced to some people who had a interest in what goes on in Vegas or what happens in Vegas. Myself and somebody that I care about very much were part of the party scene. And we were introduced to a lot of people. And we quickly figured out that this party scene was just a thinly veiled disguise for drug dealing and prostitution. And the people that participate in these parties are very prominent, very recognizable: doctors, lawyers, policemen, judges, famous Hollywood actors and actresses, lots of big name people. And when I was contacted for this project, I disclosed information about what these parties were about and what was happening in them. The progression of events led to the fact that what happened was that the people that are involved in these parties are little fish. Even though they're, big recognizable names, the people that I was working with didn't care. They were simply wanted to give these people the same opportunity they gave me to cooperate and to do the right thing and to tear the mask off of what's going on and all the sleazy, disgusting, and tragic things that go on in Vegas that the elites have access to.
And when you say these people, you mean the Oath Keepers?
The Oath Keepers, yes.
Yeah.
And this information has been gathered and used, and they talk to these doctors and lawyers and people, and then they give them the same opportunity to cooperate. And for years, this has been building up to now the mega fish have been outed. And there's information that would destroy them, ultimately. And the situation is that nobody really cares about what we were doing. Nobody cares about anybody except the elites. And so I do need to say this one thing to all the Navy SEALs out there. The person that is in charge of this network of parties today currently is an ex-Navy SEAL that everybody would recognize and is definitely in a BUDS training class. Now, that being said, I have not disclosed any information about that. And I will not disclose any information about that as long as I am allowed to do my job and take care of business and go after the people that need going after. If everybody lays off and gives me a break and doesn't hurt me or the people that I love and care about, I will take these secrets to my grave. If I have any problems or I find out any of my friends or loved ones have been hurt in any way, Carrie has all the details about who and what and some juicy, juicy pictures, all of which will be put out in the public, and it will give the SEAL community a huge black eye. So I'm asking everybody, just let David and I do what we know we're doing and go about our business, and everything will work out marvelously, and the world will be a much, much better place.
Okay. Okay, thank
Carrie?
you. Yes, go ahead, Bill.
Bill, thanks very much. Bill, it's a great pleasure to speak to you. I very much appreciated your interview. I have no problem at all with any of your credentials or any of your testimony. And I have a lot of questions to put to you when we get to that point. One of the interviewer's roles here is to ask questions that we feel others would want us to ask because they're interested in the answer themselves, not necessarily because we have any kind of an axe to grind.
Of course.
And on that basis, once or twice, I believe you mentioned a clearance that could have been interpreted by some to be above top secret. And yet that clearance does not actually exist as a national security level. That's something that exists only in the popular culture. And I wonder if you could speak to that at all, because some people may wish to take criticism of you on the basis of your use of that term.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, could you just stipulate what the classification is?
Yeah, the classification that I had was indigo. And above top secret clearances are national secrets. They are kept secret. They don't get talked about. They don't get disclosed to people with regular top secret clearances. They don't get disclosed to anybody with any other above top secret level clearance. The information is compartmentalized so that we don't know what anybody else is doing and nobody else knows what we're doing. So if something goes bad, they can whitewash the whole thing and it goes away and nobody really knows what happened. It just is.
Carrie and Bill Ryan and I all have had extensive interaction with Henry Deacon, who revealed that there are these badges that people have on, and the color of the badge changes depending on where in the facility you go. So it sounds to me like that indigo thing could be a color that these badges make, depending on your classification.
True. And Marshall White is the above top secret level clearance for people that deal with the president. But you don't see people that are near the president with little white badges. Everybody just knows who they are. It's you have to understand the level of secrecy that we're talking about. This is of critical importance to the people that would literally be put in jail if people knew what was going on.
Yeah. Let me just make an interpretive comment here, because now I understand what was happening here with the semantics. That the clearance level called above top secret does not exist. Like top secret, above top secret, that's not legitimate.
Just a term. Yeah.
That's just a term. But what I hear you talking about and what David was talking about was that there are many levels that are above the top secret level, and those terminology should confuse each other.
Let me clarify
bucket.
that.
It's a bucket.
It's if you have a top secret level clearance, you get to know any information that's top secret. If you have an above top secret level clearance, you get to know the information that's top secret and the information that's in your classification and nothing else. Certain classifications, you get to have, many areas of involvement in secret information, but it's all classified by a color or a term. And whatever your term or color is above top secret is the information that you have access to. Of course, you have access to all top secret information as well, all classified information as well, but it's that compartmentalization that you need to understand, that information can't spill over from one group to the other.
Let me just interject one thing here, and I hope I'm not treading too close to the edge saying this, but Bill, you had mentioned that these levels of classification have been handed out almost like Pez candy since 9/11.
Top secret level clearances, there's, I don't know exactly how many, but it's way more than 1 million. And that's an incredible amount of people that have access to very sensitive information. And that has very much been displayed in my life because a lot of people have come to me and told me things that I couldn't believe. But at the same time, I see things on TV that at least used to be top secret.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what's going on, and I haven't been in for 10 plus years. So, somebody could speak much better about that than me.
Okay. What I would like to do also, just before we really get into everything here, because we didn't spend a whole long time, I don't think, in the interview, I have a document that gives your training and also gives your actually you have some medals that you won. So I don't know if you want to speak to any of that, but it would be valuable, I have been told, by certain outsiders if you would name areas of your training and, just like a laundry list of various training that you've had, if you're interested.
Carrie, it really wouldn't. That document is declassified. It isn't going to produce anything sensitive. It's not going to talk about the really good medals that I've won. It doesn't talk about my trident.
Okay, are you able to talk about those yourself, though?
Yes, I along with Navy achievement, many Navy achievement medals, good conduct medals, many combat medals. Combat action ribbon. I received a Bronze Star for combat action, where we got shot up pretty bad and made it home safe. And I also got a Navy Commendation with Valor for saving somebody's life. All of which are classified, so I won't talk about them because it would possibly harm the people that were involved in the execution of those missions. I will say this about that document. The reason that I gave it to you is it points out very clearly that even though I was convicted of 11 years in prison, I still managed to get out on the exact day that I was supposed to get out if I otherwise wasn't convicted of anything. It also shows that I received pay while I was in jail. Those are two very important things to pay attention to that aren't classified.
Okay, and lastly, I have people, obviously a lot of Navy SEALs, and is a rumor mill out there that's really going full force as a result of actually some of those probably Navy SEALs, maybe well-meaning as they may be, who simply do not understand, they don't even know that Osama bin Laden was not killed by SEAL Team 6. He actually died many years ago, and that's documented, but it's documented more in the, if you would call it, the conspiracy or so-called conspiracy areas that we deal with on a daily basis. But people do not understand the relationship you had with this, if you want to call it that, with the 16-year-old girl. Now somebody is writing to me that the girl was 12. Can you please
tomorrow
address
she'll be
that?
11, and that day after that she'll be 8.
Yeah.
These people don't show any information. It's just talk. They don't show any proof. They don't even show their faces. So,
Okay.
I don't care.
I understand.
David Icke taught me that.
Okay, but in the interview, basically, I just want the facts on the table in this live stream so that we can get on with it. You know what I'm saying? And the facts are that you had consensual sex with a 16-year-old and you were 25 at the time. That it was not against the law where you were located, which I understand was, I believe, San Diego, but clarify it.
Let me stop you there.
Go right ahead.
It has been since pointed out to me that it may have been against the law. So I will amend my statement and say this. I was not tried in the state of California, even though this incident occurred in the state of California. I was tried by the military, even though proper protocol and procedure would say that I should have been tried by the state of California.
Okay, but you were also tried 2 years after the fact. Is that correct?
I just say that again.
You were tried 2 years after the fact.
Yeah.
The military went back 2 years to find this incident and then charge you. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the incident occurred long before my court-martial occurred, yes.
Okay, so at this point, I think that we've covered the most controversial areas that the SEAL teams out there, the various Navy SEALs, etc., are concerned about. And what I would like to do also is talk just briefly, and I'm sorry to delay this here, but I would like you to touch on Osama bin Laden and SEAL Team 6. SEAL Team 6 was said to have killed Osama bin Laden recently, and then they disappeared or were disappeared in a so-called helicopter accident that included all of them. Is that not true?
This is public knowledge.
Okay, but there are a lot of people, believe me, who have no idea.
It was on the news. SEAL Team 6 didn't exist. Then all of a sudden on the news, SEAL Team 6 goes in, captures, kills Osama bin Laden, and throws his body into the sea without ever recording a minute of footage, even though every SEAL out there knows that never happens. Everything that we do is closely documented and recorded. And then shortly after that, they loaded 20 SEALs and 18 other Special Forces people, some were not our military, but a total of 38 people onto a helicopter, and that helicopter was somehow destroyed. Some say it was an RPG. The news said it was an RPG.
But those weren't the same individuals, were they? It was just members of the same team. Correct?
No, there was many, many members of SEAL Team 6 on that
Yeah,
helicopter.
they were the same individuals.
No, but sorry, let me clarify my question. What I meant was that members of SEAL Team 6 supposedly were involved in Osama bin Laden's assassination. And then other members of SEAL Team 6 were in the helicopter accident. Because SEAL Team 6 isn't just a few people. SEAL Team 6 is quite a large team.
Yes, it is, Bill, but you're missing the point. There were many of the people that were on that helicopter and were killed, did take part in the SEAL Team 6 raid on Osama bin Laden. They were in that raid, and they were on that helicopter, and they were killed.
And that was information that came off.
I checked into it.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify, because I wasn't aware that there was a 100% overlap between the assassination team and the helicopter death team. I was just interested in that. I don't think this is important, personally, for the conversation that we're having.
I think it's really important because we're talking about basically a conspiracy. And this is how people are silenced. It happens. And people that are in this sector are very familiar with how people are silenced. It supposedly was an accident. Okay, these kinds of accidents happen all the time when people are not supposed to talk about something that might happen. And actually, there wasn't 100% overlap in the personnel, but there were many of the personnel, the key people that were involved in the raid were involved in the helicopter accident. Yes.
Let me say this very clearly, Carrie. We don't know which members of SEAL Team 6 participated in the raid. We don't know which...
Well, okay.
We know which members of SEAL Team 6 were killed, but it was never disclosed about who participated in the operation.
Okay, well, I did read a newspaper article that did name certain individuals that were in both places.
Okay, I never saw that information.
Okay, yeah, no problem. This is the kind of thing we have. We have news. You can either catch it or catch can, and obviously, not everyone can see everything. Okay, so from this point on, let's move forward. Now, I do want to give David Wilcock the first sort of stab at all of this, to ask you whatever questions and bring out the topics that perhaps you've been talking about offline. And
we need to talk about that.
Okay, great. And we'll start because David was first to come on board, and then after David feels he's sufficiently covered enough material, let's give Bill Ryan a chance, okay? And since I had my chance early on, I will take last position here, but I also want to give the people who are now furiously asking questions in the chat a chance as well. So I will step aside for them as well. So let's go, David. This is your shot.
Okay. I guess there's a couple things that I would like to add personally while I have the chance before I go into questioning, because Bill and I discussed this before, that there are certain pieces of information that are unique to my sources that I wanted to get out there. First of all, this strange sounds that people are reporting hearing all over the world, which is a metallic, deep, resonating sound along with whistling noise. Carrie and Bill, both of you, Bill Ryan, will remember interviewing Dan Burish, in which he described working at Area 51 and working with an extraterrestrial that apparently, based on his understanding, was a human from Earth's future, but on a catastrophic timeline, timeline number 2, and that this being had a condition called degenerative neuropathy, which caused it to have this sort of praying mantis type of posture, the hunched over posture. And if you remember, Dan Burish's area of specialization was something called the Lotus Project, which was an offshoot of his efforts to take tissue samples of this being and to then hopefully engineer a genetic solution to its degenerative neuropathy condition. Burish produced an incredible amount of data online. I was tracking his story all the way back in the year 2000. There was a great deal of information that he put out in the beginning that was since pulled from the internet. But I printed out the book and I had the entire document of everything that he'd put out before it was sanitized off the internet. That convinced me very early in the game, because this is over a decade ago now, that he was for real. But what I wanted to point out was, you will recall that he said that in the line of this work that he was doing, that there needed to be a fail-safe option. The people running the base felt there needed to be a fail-safe option so that in the event that there was a hostile situation going on in that room, that they could hit a button and instantaneously incinerate the entire room, and that if you remember correctly, and this also happened, by the way, when Dan Burish was the main speaker at the International UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada, and I was standing right there by the side of the stage encouraging him to say this stuff. He walked up the shaft that was the ventilation shaft, which they told him was necessary for the underground base to be able to breathe. Okay? It had nothing to do with that. These bases are completely self-sufficient in terms of their air content. This shaft, as he found out, was to ventilate the fumes, the fire, and the resulting gases and smoke from them burning out a particular area of the base. So I want to make it perfectly clear that we have a through line that establishes that these shafts do exist, that they are used for the purpose of destroying the personnel and the equipment in the base should a tactical situation arise where that is required. And we have independently a naval intelligence source that has been the bane of our existence out there. It's called Sorcha Fall. I'm sure you guys all know who I'm talking about. WhatDoesItMean.com is one. EUTimes.net would be the other main website. Posing as a Russian female journalist, but putting out a great deal of disinformation that has fooled an incredible number of people. And each time that a new Sorcha Fall article comes out, it seems like there's a whole new wave of people that get pulled in. However, I want to point out that the best disinfo always involves drips of truth in between the lies. So taking that into account, I do believe it was a very accurate statement from Sorcha Fall, which is naval intelligence based on leaks that we've had from several insiders, that the sounds that were recorded during the baseball game that people heard, that the newscasters commented on, say, "Ooh, somebody open up the door and let the air out." And the fact that those same sounds were heard in Virginia directly before the earthquake that occurred in Virginia, which we have from multiple credible sources was an actual destruction of the underground base in that area. We have multiple credible reports when we combine Dan Burish and we combine Sorcha Fall, which I believe in this case was telling the truth, saying that that is exactly the sound that you get when you ventilate these air passages. So the couple other things. You can Google the water phone on the internet. The water phone is a musical instrument that is used for horror movie soundtracks. It looks like a big metal plate. It has a bunch of little metal rods coming off of it, and you hold this clamp in the middle. The clamp goes down to the bottom of the plate, and then all the rods come around the central rod that you hold on to, and then you bow it with a violin, and you can get these incredibly haunting sounds, these metallic sounds. And people have said that these noises people are hearing sound just like the water phone. Well, that's correct. But what they don't realize is that the mechanism is not a water phone. It's similar to a trumpet. If you blow into a trumpet, it's basically just a metallic tube, and the resonance of the sound of your lips vibrating then creates the sound. So I believe that what's going on here is that the bases, these flame exhaust valves, are being blown on the bases, knowing that they're going to make a very disturbing noise if they open the aperture and they tweak the aperture a certain way so that the iris is partially open, partially closed. And that the explicit purpose for doing this is to get people terrified that there's going to be some sort of cataclysmic thing that happens on Earth, whether it's an alien invasion or whether it's allegedly magma moving under the crust. So this is all prelude to asking you a question, Bill, which is your work with timelines 1 and 2 and your understandings based on your psychic training that we actually are existing in a composite reality, and the composite is based on energy from the sun, energy from the center of the galaxy, energy from the planet itself, and of course, to some varying degrees, the combined composite of people's intention and their mindset and their focus of consciousness. And it would seem to me that if we open up this discussion, some people will not know what you're talking about regarding timeline number 1, timeline number 2. In my view, that's the most significant part of your testimony. And specifically, what happens if a lot of people start thinking that the end of the world is going to be here, Bill?
Okay. It's a very easy explanation, but it's very difficult to understand because it just sounds too simple.
I understand.
What the truth is that we as human beings have a lot more power than we are led to believe. And that allows us to be controlled. And if we are controlled by fear, we believe in fear. And if we believe in fear, we create fear. If we do the opposite, and we believe in love or hope, let me go back a little bit and say, if you understand how things work, every positive emotion can be, or positive thinking or positive belief can be distilled down into love. And every negative emotion, every negative thought, every negative behavior can be distilled down into fear. So that's why I use those two words.
I would agree, yeah.
So if everybody's afraid of the end of the world coming, that's what's going to happen because we don't understand our power. If we have hope and we understand that we are currently on a path that the elite are desperately trying to get back on timeline 2. So they can literally get away with the most incredible crimes to humanity. So they don't have to suffer consequences. And they are the ones that are becoming desperately afraid of what's happening. So they're trying to do everything in their power to create enough fear to push the momentum back in the negative direction. And I've told everybody for a very long time, and most recently in my interview, that we really should have hope. And I can say that even more so now, having talked to you, because we just found out there's some pretty good reasons to have hope right now.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
When we compared notes and we figured out that it's really coming together now. And with all the positive things that are happening, it is really looking good for the home team right now, even though I can't disclose details because it's very easy to mess things up and create a paradox unintentionally. And so you try not to change things as much as possible when you realize that things are going the right direction. And I gave this example to David. If you've ever driven a really large ship, if you try to turn the ship's wheel back and forth and keep the compass right in the middle, the boat swerves back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But if you make tiny adjustments and not focus on trying to keep the compass right in the middle, the ship drives pretty straight. So when we're working to try and do big changes, we're doing our best to make really little adjustments to what we already see is happening. And even though it's not out there at popular information land, it's happening. And I can tell you now more so than ever, based on David and I talking and going, holy crap, you're doing that too? There's more than just us out there working on this effort. It's probably a significant portion of the military that's on board right now fixing things.
Okay,
Yeah,
I do want to say that there are others, civilians out there that are just as talented in these areas and are doing their part as well. And many of them may actually be listening to this. But David, and I'm not sure where you want to go personally with this at this time, but I think it's necessary to get into the nature of Bill Wood's experience with Looking Glass in more depth, which we did not have time to do. Okay, great.
Okay.
So go right ahead.
What I would like to do, first of all, is summarize some of what we have in our Camelot heritage. And by Camelot heritage, I mean going all the way back to the first time that you and Bill Ryan interviewed Mr. X and going on from there. One of the earliest interviews you guys got was Dan Burrish. Now, the Dan Burrish story has confused and befuddled a lot of people, but I can speak from personal experience that Bill Ryan had a Camelot summit in Switzerland, and I was present. And we actually traveled with Dan Burrish. We had plenty of time to interact with him off the record. And I also, as I said, began following his material as soon as it appeared online back in 2000. So I feel that I've extensively been briefed on what Dan Burrish had to say. So I would like, in a sense, to take the benefit of the doubt for the listener and the viewer and just sort of give a little bit of a background, because I think it will set up what Bill Wood has to say nicely, and then we can get into specific questioning. What we heard from Dan Burrish historically was that there was a program called Looking Glass, and that this program involved a very large device, the center of which is a barrel of water. That this barrel of water then has 3 rings that rotate around it. And what those rings do is they create a Faraday cage or Faraday shield around the water. It shields off the water from all electromagnetic reference points to our space-time. And that electromagnetic null zone apparently allows for very unique hyperdimensional properties of water, which is one of the main reasons why our bodies are 75% water. Water allows for a conduit to exist between the reality that we are in and a parallel universe, which I have now documented scientifically in extensive detail in my book, Source Field Investigations, is a reality in which time is 3-dimensional. Time exists as an actual landscape that can be navigated through. And it sounds confusing, but what I'm actually saying is that if you go into this reality, to travel a distance in that reality, which would appear just that you're moving through the landscape, is the equivalent in our reality of actually changing your location in linear time. So if you take a portal, which do exist, and you portal over into this parallel reality, and you travel a given distance, and then you portal back into our reality, you will have traveled in time depending on your direction. If you travel ahead of the position the Earth was in when you left, you will end up in the future. And if you travel behind the position the Earth was in when you left, you will go into the past. So what we've heard is that the looking glass technology is actually a reverse engineering of the pineal gland in the brain, which functions by the same mechanism. And I've documented this extensively in my book with medical references, that this gland does create a Faraday shield, a Faraday cage around water inside. And then what happens is people say when they have an out-of-body experience, they see a silver cord come out of their body. And their astral body's out there floating around in space, and whatever their astral body sees is then wired into the brain via the pineal gland, which is the junction point between your physical body and your, what they would call in the black programs, the transient body. So the looking glass device, and this is based on Burish and a couple other whistleblowers I got access to, the looking glass device is a reverse engineering of the pineal gland, but on a much larger level. We heard that if you approach this device, which is very large, that whomever approaches the device then couples with your mind, and it enhances your natural abilities to be able to access what I like to call the source field, or this parallel reality where time is three-dimensional. Whatever you think you want to see, or wherever you think you want to be looking at, is what appears in this argon gas that is sprayed around the central barrel inside looking glass. There's a fisheye lens distortion around the edges of the sphere of argon gas. The argon gas creates a yellowy color. And that in effect, whatever the person wants to see is what's inside. The last little piece of data that I want to toss in is that from Burish, using this device, we heard that there were two timelines that were being witnessed post-1983. The year 1983, apparently there was some sort of catastrophic event in which humanity has now bifurcated onto two different timelines. One timeline ends in catastrophe. The other timeline does not.
Okay, excuse me, David, I'm just sorry. You're starting to come back into focus. Your video started to go completely out of sync while you're talking, but I can see on the live stream. What the live stream sees is my desktop, just so you know.
Okay, I'm probably moving my hands too much.
Maybe so. There's a lot of motion. So what happens is I do want to stop you also because I am concerned that you may also be mixing up the yellow cube or yellow book and looking glass.
No, definitely not.
No, it's not.
All right. Okay.
I'm just trying to set a groundwork because I think everything else that's substantive that could follow in this discussion would benefit from this philosophical and scientific foundation that I'm trying to lay in.
Yeah.
Let me
You should finish.
Yes, I hear you.
About this.
I understand. Okay, that's fine. I will allow him to finish. But I do want to say this testimony that he's talking about, the information coming from Dan Burish, is on a Project Camelot video. Which is on the Project Camelot library. It is called Stargate Secrets, and it was filmed in 2007 by Project Camelot. So go right ahead, David. But if you want to research this and hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, which is Dan Burish, that's where to go.
It's highly compelling stuff, and I want to point out that I've had access to 4 other insiders who have not spoken to Camelot and have validated and extended what I know about this. So that's another thing. One of whom I met through Richard Hoagland, a couple others, Daniel being one. We remember talking about that. This is a guy who allegedly worked on the Phoenix 3 project, which people colloquially call Montauk. What we've heard, I'm just trying to set it up so that Bill can go and take the ball. 1983, apparently the messing around in the Phoenix 3 project or the Montauk project, creating portals, creating time apertures. They sent much too much energy through, and it was done deliberately, and that's a long discussion, but they did this deliberately to allow a very large manifestation to come through a portal that ended up destroying the base. But there were unintended consequences by creating a portal that big. And what it did is it actually, to some degree, damaged the fabric of time as it flows on Earth. And apparently, from what I've heard, and Bill, you can probably straighten me out on this, but we all have been jumping back and forth between these two timelines in our own lives and the decisions that we're making. What I also heard from Burish, and again, Carrie, I believe this is all on your video, is that there is a flicker rate between these two parallel realities, and that it requires computer servers and high-speed film. They have to high-speed film what the data is in the looking glass. You don't just get to see whatever you want to look at. You get two realities that interlace with each other so fast that you can't really make sense out of it. And that those two realities, the flicker rate, the frame rate between them goes faster and faster up until December 21st, 2012, at which time the flicker rate is so fast that no useful information can be gained from the looking glass at that point. I want to say that I brought this up recently to one of my top insiders, and he literally shivered in his boots because looking glass is so classified that he didn't even want to talk about this over the phone. But Bill, what I can honestly say is, when I saw your interview, there were enough things that you said that made me very, very aware that you are not just pruning from Project Camelot data and from things that I put in my book. You are very much an original source who actually had access to Looking Glass. So I think everybody is on the edge of their seat wanting to know, how did you get involved in this? What was your experience with the device? And what did you come to understand about Timeline 1, Timeline 2, and how it affects our immediate future this year?
Okay. First question, how I got involved in it. Part of my special training, something that I was just good at, and having specific training enhanced this ability, but I guess I could explain it as intuitive problem solving. Many times in my career in battlefield situations or in combat planning or mission planning, I was able to glean conclusions that ultimately it was exactly the way it happened. Because of that information and the awareness of my ability to do these things in a kind of freaky way, I was brought into the Looking Glass Project to try to solve the very problem that you were speaking about. And let me just say this is a very heavy subject. And everybody needs to know that the best understanding is to know that we know nothing about what time is. Our level of knowledge is so small and so infantile and so distorted that I can literally describe it as an illusion. Something that we have made up so we can understand something that we don't understand. That being said, and understanding string theory, and that when you exercise free will and you make a decision, the opposite choice still exists. It doesn't exist where you exist, but it still exists. Think of it as a dream world. So you make one decision in this reality, and then you go to sleep at night, and you make the opposite decision, and both have consequences. It's
yeah,
those
we've heard
consequences.
We've heard insiders call this layered time.
Yes.
That each probable outcome creates a layer that does exist in some probable reality.
Yes. And what is hard to understand is that as we get closer to 2012, and nobody's completely solved this problem, not even me. But as we get closer to 2012, our choices end in inevitable consequences. And that's really tough to understand, because it's hard to imagine that no matter what choice you make, the path twists back to one inevitability. But that's what happens. There are many, many paths, but there's only one destination. And every time you take the wrong path, that path inevitably leads back to the only path that takes you to your destination. Easiest way to explain. So in investigating the problem with the 2012 coincidence, is my determination was that there is a contraction of the timelines, that the choices are eliminated by our understanding of life and knowledge and being given more information and a million other things that will happen very soon that we don't understand yet because they haven't happened yet. But basically the way it ends, and the only information that I got was that it came down to two timelines. And it was very clear that this actually happened. They wanted to know is that it does come down to two timelines, two inevitable conclusions. What I was supposed to solve was which conclusion was going to happen. It was kind of a funny answer. And the answer is whichever one we choose. Because it's too complicated, as you said, even for supercomputers, to figure this issue out. And all I can tell you is what my intuition tells me about this, is that the reason I was being asked the question is because they were trying to figure out how to make Timeline 2 happen. And there seemed to be a lot of information about how to guide the paths to make to displace the path the way you want it to go, even though it seemed inevitably that we were going to go down one path.
Bill, did you ever hear of a device called a TVG? Time vector generator?
No.
Yeah, Daniel, one of my contacts, said that they actually had devices called TVGs, or time vector generators, whose purpose was to try to send energy to strengthen a particular timeline.
Yeah, I never dealt with that, no.
Yeah, we also heard that there were Project Sigma created conferences every year where they were trying to solve this issue of the timelines, and everybody who goes back and watches the Dan Burrish video on Camelot will see that he referred to it as the DCTP, or the Doctrine of the Convergent Timeline Paradox. And he was saying that timeline number 2 is catastrophic, timeline number 1 is not. He also was saying that this was related to a solar event. He said that the sun at the end of this year will release a massive blast of what he referred to as micro wormholes, and that these micro wormholes may not be visible to the eye, but that they constitute portals in time that actually are created by the sun. And he said that these portals actually remarkably change the energy budget of the Earth, how much energy runs through the Earth, and that if the Looking Glass devices were left intact, that they would create a much greater flow of these micro wormholes, this time flow, for lack of a better term, through them rather than the rest of the Earth, and that in effect it would actually destabilize the Earth's axis and potentially cause a pole shift. Now, Bill, one of the things that really jumped out at me about your testimony was the understanding that timeline 2 was very substantially weaker than timeline number 1, where we get through this and we don't have a problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I have explanation for that, but it again takes another explanation of understanding. Okay, so let's talk about density. We, because of our five senses, are limited to the understanding that we think we're solid. But in all reality, if you take an atom and you blow the nucleus of an atom up to the size of a pea, just a pea, the electron going around that pea wouldn't barely fit in a football stadium.
That's right.
And that's a hydrogen atom. Imagine how much more space a carbon atom takes up with its multiple electron shells. With that understanding, you can figure out that as human beings, we are actually made up of mostly empty space. Now, if you can think about that, you have to think about what holds us together or what makes us solid. What compresses our density into what we understand to be our human form. And the best guess is it's these little micro wormholes. And that is what they're studying with the CERN project, to try to understand these God particles or these micro wormholes and how we are of the density we are, and yet pretty much everybody I know thinks that they have a soul or a spirit that exists inside their body that is of a different density. It exists just as much as our body exists, but we can't perceive it with our five senses. That's okay, because our five senses limit our understanding, and our extra senses are the things that give us the answers to these questions.
Okay, I know that my time is probably limited, so I want to get to the good stuff here so that we have a chance to dialogue about this a little bit. And that would be, there has been an incredible void of intel surrounding timeline number 1. Now, the intel void does not exist in terms of the data that I've put together in my book, Source Field Investigations. Mm-hmm. And I gather, Bill, that you read this book in part because you were dazzled by how much it contextualized and explained the experiences that you had, I guess it was about a decade ago from what you were saying.
Yes. Well, I mean, more experience since then, because my understanding of how I did what I did in the military was skewed by the information that I was given. I have since figured out that what I was told about how I do what I do was a lie. So it could be controlled. It could be taken away.
Right. Just to remind people that didn't see your video, you said in the recent Camelot video that you were implanted with a metallic object, and they told you. Oh, okay.
It was just an RFID chip. It had nothing to do with anything. It was just for military purposes only.
Okay. But the idea being that did they explain to you that this was going to help your psi ability or something? No,
it was the training that skewed my perception of my believing and creating. In essence, that I didn't understand that I could do what I do because I believed I could do it.
Interesting point.
When I found the understanding that I knew I could do it because I'd done it before, and when I regained the belief in the ability, it came back, kind of better than ever.
Can you bring us in a little more to whatever degree is comfortable for you? Give us a visual about Looking Glass. I mean, just talk us through a little bit about either what you saw or what you experienced? Because obviously, like for example, how many times were you exposed to the device? Was it in a large room with a high ceiling? What, just some of that kind of stuff.
When I was shown the device, it wasn't active. And I believe that by that time, they stopped using it because there was some serious fears about consequences of using it anymore. I didn't get all the information, but I gathered that there had been some serious issues with using it, and so they decided to stop. They wanted to use it again, which is why I was brought in to try to figure out the problem. And my solution didn't offer a good an explanation that would make it so they would dare turn it on again, basically.
And you said that you were an intuitive problem solver, that you had some psychic abilities that they had noticed in tactical situations were very helpful and accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very entertaining story that we can talk about offline, but in essence, I was brought in to a situation that was actually occurring, and it was a battlefield meltdown. The planning was bad, the intel was bad, and we were trying to get people out alive. And I got brought into this situation through very unusual means that blew my cover a little bit and pissed some very high in charge people off. And instead of me getting in trouble, the high end person in charge got fired. So we'll talk about that later.
So
everybody made it out alive. I will say that.
Interesting. I still want to get a picture of the room. I mean, did you smell anything in the room? Was it cold in the room? Was it a large room? Tell us a little bit about what it was like.
It was basically a metal cube. There was very little in it except for the looking glass. It looked very similar to a storage area.
Okay.
And I was shown the device, and then I was taken into another room and given massive amounts of data, paperwork, computer, not videos, but, DVDs, CDs, all the information, and I went through it.
Okay, but...
but actually, could you describe the Looking Glass? You heard
Yes.
David describe the physicality of Looking Glass. Can you describe, because Dan Burish actually on our video has a drawing of it, and I don't know if you have seen, well, I'm pretty sure you haven't seen the video, but I don't know if David showed you the drawing. But could you recall can you describe the physicality of the device? Were there rings? Was it inside a ring? What was the metallic? What was metallic? What wasn't metallic? That kind of thing.
David's description was basically dead on, other than the fact that I didn't note the water thing, but I assume that's because it wasn't being used. But the three rings, they were all perfectly aligned with each other. It looked very nondescript.
what was the size? How large was it?
10, 11 feet tall.
Oh, okay.
Did the rings sit, did they sit freely, or were they set inside a structure?
It was all in storage. It was.
So it's packed up.
It was saying. All the rings were completely aligned. It was packed up. It had a cover over it. It was in a room where it couldn't move around. It was just sitting there.
Are you able to say where it was? Was it in a facility? Was it in Area 51? Was it underground somewhere? Are you allowed to say where it was?
Not on TV.
Okay. Okay. Did you happen to see the Jodie Foster movie Contact? Wasn't it called Contact?
See, now you're inside my head. If I had to describe it, it looked like a little contact device. Again, I just got a look at it. I got to see it. And it was the first part of what I was doing. And then I got told about it, and then I did my investigation. The device had nothing to do with what I was doing.
What color was it?
It was gray, metallic.
Okay, so it was all metallic.
Okay, but when you did your work, for how long did you do your work? Did you come back every day for a month, 3 months, 6 months?
I worked for just over a week on it. And then I came back again to answer questions, or to try to answer questions about what people wanted to know. But the questions weren't questions, they were leading conclusions that I just simply reiterated the facts that I had given out earlier. And for all I know, it wasn't what I was told, because I never actually saw it operating. It was very nondescript and very passing in my memory.
Okay.
Because it didn't have anything to do with what I was doing.
So when you say you worked on it for a week, you also
I worked on the information that
right. That was where I was getting to. Could you describe, like, for example, did you see a narrated video documentary with a host and somebody telling you about it?
No.
What kind of briefing materials could you describe? Some of what you saw, like how extensive was it? How much written documentation did you have to go through? All that kind of stuff.
I was given other people's video documentation, other people's opinions, the data that had been gleaned prior to me becoming involved in it. And my determinations were the determinations of everybody else, basically, to some degree or another. Everybody had, different opinions about the details, but I just gave a different description of pretty much what everybody else said, that it seems that we are coming into a contraction of timelines, and it's based on a lot of different things, but you mentioned solar alignment and the Earth getting bombarded with these mini wormholes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good that you mentioned that, because if you change the amount of mini wormholes in a density, you change the density. So,
right.
But here's what I can tell you is that it's too big a problem for a human being to solve. And when human beings use the device, that was the catastrophic fault with the device, is our lack of understanding with knowing how it works and being able to use it, because we don't know. But that gets into some very tough subjects about time and what time really is, and we see it as linear, but then there's an argument that it's cyclical, and then there's an argument that it only exists in our density, and in other densities it transcends. It's mind-numbing subject if you try to think about it all.
Okay, well, getting back to very practical discussion, did you see video of the device in operation?
No, I was never allowed to see anything about the device proper. I was shown the device, or what I was told that it was the device, but this thing scared the shit out of everybody.
Wow.
It really was a big deal, big problem that nobody understood. And I don't think anybody really understands it to this day.
Did you hear anything about how the operator of the device would gain the ability to tamper with people?
I gained the understanding that the operator of the device controlled the device in such a way that the operator intuitively affected how the device operated.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you don't have any understanding of how that higher part of you interacts with this world, you can't, it's very complicated. I wish I could give a better explanation, but it's like handing an iPod to a caveman and saying, figure it out.
Did you ever hear the term OBIT in any of your briefing documents?
Is it an acronym? Because it doesn't sound
Outer Bands Individuated Teletracer.
I didn't hear it used at that term, but I heard of something that would describe that.
Okay, could you explain a little more then? Because I'd be happy to share what I know, but I want to hear what you got to say.
I don't think I was given enough information to truly understand it. To me, it went back to the inherent problem with the operator intuitively interfacing with the device and skewing its operation.
Okay. What I heard is, this is going back to Daniel now, because Daniel was extensively briefed on LG, because in the Phoenix 3 program, most people call Montauk, they were working on these problems with timelines, but on a much deeper level, because they were sending people through portals and actually sending them to those locations. So I want to be clear that I lived with Daniel for a year. I had extensive interaction with him. And as a result of that, he explained to me innumerable times that when you took this chair out of the UFO and you send people, that you put somebody in the chair, that it would wire into your brain, and you had to zero it out. In other words, all the wavelengths that your brain gave off, I think it was 22 or 24, I don't remember off the top of my head.
This was Looking Glass?
This was the chair. This
is the Montauk chair. The Montauk chair.
Okay. Sorry.
This was a chair from a UFO wreckage, and people would sit in the chair, and then it would basically allow you to massively amplify your psychic talents, to the extent that if you thought about a particular place in space or in time, a portal would appear in the room that allowed people to actually go through it, and they would experience a wormhole, a literal wormhole ride. And there was a sine wave graph, of which there were 400 plus graphs that they were tracking coming out of the chair, one of which was a sine wave that apparently was a natural Earth harmonic that was a 20-year cycle, probably related to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, which are very important because those are the two biggest planets and they conjoin every 20 years. Okay. And if you understand the flow of time, that would have a lot to do with the matrix of time. Anyway, what he said was that people traveling through these portals, when the wave would show December 21st, 2012, and it was very specific, that they would go flatline. And all the graphs that were coming out of the chair and all 400 of these fiber optic cables, there was more than 400 fiber optic cables. There was a bundle of fiber optics coming out, and they discerned 400 channels out of many, many thousands they could have chosen. And these were the 400 that seemed to be the most useful. Mm-hmm. They found that all of those graphs went flatline on December 21st, 2012, and the person going through the portal would have an experience of what they called the bump, or the discontinuity. And the bump was literally, you're flying through this wormhole, and all of a sudden it's as if you slammed into something. But instead of this being sort of like a painful collision, it's as if your body has melted into pure bliss. And you seem to have become one with the galaxy to the extent that you could be a planet, you could be a nebula, or, you could be a star, a planet, or you could be a subatomic particle. There was no sense of time. It was totally ecstatic. And when they left that place, they wanted to get back there as soon as possible. Anything that they saw after this bump, they could travel past the bump, but they came to the conclusion over many years of research that anything after the bump was completely subjective to the person in the chair and to the person who actually was having the experience. And that's one area in which I see a lot of crossover in what you were saying on the Camelot video.
Yeah,
that we don't understand this technology.
Right. Time seems to not exist or to be so drastically different that we can't possibly understand what we're perceiving. Again, that's how when I say the timelines are converging, that's kind of that's my understanding, is that when you reach this destination, that everything changes. Everything's different.
This is a very
understand what it means because we live in a time where time exists. It's tough.
Well, okay. Now, at this point, and we could go on with that. We could also go into some analogies because it has something also to do with emerging of polarities. When you're saying a converging of timelines, you're really talking about emerging of polarities in a sense. And this is where, in a sense, this distinction, it is a samadhi-like experience that, at least what David is describing, went on in the bump. But at this time, David, you've been going for a while, and what I'd like to do is give Bill Ryan a chance to ask Bill Wood some questions. And
let me say one thing.
Go right ahead.
I'm going to describe this opposite because I think it's easier to understand if I do it this way. If you tried to describe night and day to somebody who had never experienced night and day, how would you do it? Okay, well, imagine that you go from a night and day to no longer understanding night and day because that choice, that duality didn't exist anymore. I guess that's a good explanation of what I understand is a lack of duality. Some would say a lack of choice, some would say a lack of opposition, but it's much easier to understand if you think about coming from one and going to the other, but it's hard to think that you could come full circle and come back to this understanding of who cares about night and day, I just want this.
I just want to toss in the one last question that I was hoping to work up to, because I think it'll segue very nicely.
Okay.
You had said in the Camelot video a very provocative statement, which was that timeline number one, to your understanding, was tantamount to a spontaneous human evolution of some kind in our consciousness. And I'm interested in how you came across that information. And then after that, I'm sure Bill and Carrie can pick it up from there. But I'm really interested in what information did you obtain about timeline number one? Because nobody else talking about timeline number one has really said anything except, oh, yeah, well, in that timeline we survived. But you seem to imply that there's a really jealous guarding over what that timeline one contains and what happens to us in timeline number one.
It's a simple conclusion that we come to a level of understanding where we can understand what I was trying to figure out. We find these answers that change everything. And
Did they tell you this in the briefing document?
No, this was a conclusion that many people came up with in many different ways. But it seems to be a logical conclusion that we gain an understanding so quickly near the end that the answers become so obvious that you would never come to another conclusion. And the only explanation of that is some kind of evolution of thought that makes it so there's only one understanding of things. There's not these multiple interpretations of what is.
That doesn't bode very well if you're trying to control the world with an occult government.
That seemed to be the biggest problem that everybody wanted a solution to, and it didn't really seem like there is a solution to it. So that was the conundrum that everybody came up with when you ask an impossible question.
Thank you, Bill Wood. I'll hand it over to Bill Ryan.
Okay.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Bill, for your patience in putting up with all of us here asking you questions, and that includes, with the paradox of time here, all the questions which I'm just about to ask you myself. I'll try and cut to the chase and not take up an enormous amount of airtime here, because most of the people who are tuning into this live stream broadcast probably want to hear your story. If you'll forgive me just talking for a couple of minutes, just in terms of background which I can add. Anyone who's watching this now, or anyone who's listening to this later, if you Google Project Camelot and then Project Looking Glass, you will see probably the best single web page on the internet which gives a full exposition of what Project Looking Glass is and was. A lot of it is taken from our friend Bill Hamilton, the veteran UFO researcher who we count as a good friend of ours. And also all of the detailed diagrams that were supplied to us by Dan Burish, who allowed us to publish them with his full permission, and we're very grateful for that. And that's just a visual aid to these complicated descriptions which both David and yourself, Bill, have been trying to supply the listeners to. Some people who are following this testimony will be old hands and will be as curious as all of us are about it, and some of them will be coming new to the subject, presumably with their eyes as wide as saucers and their eyebrows raised substantially, because that's the nature of this information. So Google Project Camelot and Project Looking Glass, and you get the whole story there, which you can study at your leisure. The other thing which I wanted to add, just as a personal convergence, if you like, and David made a reference to this about the doctrine of the converging timeline paradox, the DCTP. Like David, I was following Dan Burish's story for practically 10 years, and I first read about this on Linda Howe's site, earthfiles.com, the DCTP, and that kind of lodged with me like a kind of huge splinter in my mind, which I've never been able to extract since then. And I never understood until your testimony and your interview with Kerry, your excellent interview with Kerry, what the doctrine of the converging timeline paradox meant. And you explained that. And I want to thank you for that, because it's like, oh my God, this is what Dan Burish was talking about all this time, and nobody actually explained it for me. So I want to thank you for that, and probably on behalf of many other people too, who may have been following this story for quite a long time. Now, when we're talking about Dan Burish, and following David's example, this preamble is going to lead up to a question. Kerry and I had the unique, remarkable privilege in December 2007 of meeting with Dan Burish personally in a very noisy casino in Las Vegas. Kerry, you will remember this. It was a remarkable meeting. And Dan debriefed to us for 5 hours after a 6-month sabbatical, which he had been on during the latter half of 2007, when he was part of a project team that were investigating, to put it in lay terms, this whole territory of possible futures and what may lie ahead. And the result of all of that is documented in the Project Camelot report, Timeline 1 version 83. Mm-hmm. And that's a very simple web page to find. You Google Project Camelot and T1V83, Timeline 1 version 83, and you get the whole deal there. And this now leads up to a question. Because what Dan told us in such detail, in such personal, off-record detail over a 5-hour continuous conversation, which I would have given anything to have been able to record and publish it. This was all off-record. It was an astonishing amount of information, and neither of us have been able to remember all of it. There's absolutely no doubt in our minds, having been through an experience like that this is completely real. So I just wanted to echo what David had said, that there's so much back-channel personal experience here, talking to not only Dan as a whistleblower off record, and many other people as well, that to people out there who are listening to this, watching this, thinking, well, this all sounds like a fairy story here. Are these guys making it up or what? And the answer is that no, we're not. We really are not. We're not making this stuff up. And some of it is so extraordinarily weird that it almost defies language to be able to describe the whole thing. Now, Timeline 1 variant 83. Dan reported to us that in this investigation of possible futures that was conducted in the latter half of 2007, it was evaluated that this thing called Timeline 1 variant 83 was the most probable variant of Timeline 1. Now, Timeline 1, as you and David have both been explaining to the listeners here, is the non-catastrophic timeline. Mm-hmm. But the non-catastrophic timeline, as it was evaluated then, definitely had some bad things happen. And what Timeline 1 variant 83 contained was a really frightening scenario, as was seen from the standpoint of the back end of 2007, that there would be continuity of government with Hillary Clinton as the elected president in 2008. As we know, this didn't happen. There was going to be a nuclear exchange, as I remember, between Pakistan and India, followed by, over a 2 or 3 year period, a much larger conflagration, which would have been an extremely destructive scenario for planet Earth, but not a game ender like Timeline 2 would have been. It wasn't a pole shift. The planet didn't split in half. It was just, this is in inverted commas here, it was just World War III. Now this hasn't happened yet, although anyone following the news may have reason to suspect that the elite controllers with their, who are still trying to be the controllers, so to speak, still are trying to start World War III as we start. They may not be able to engineer a pole shift, but they're sure trying to do something out there. Now, here's my question. And I've got a few other questions to follow, Kerry, and I appreciate your patience here in the way that you've been moderating this. If I could have a few minutes after Bill answers this one. It's like, what's your understanding, Bill Wood, of the variance of Timeline 1? As
it's funny that you asked this question, but I'll let you finish.
Actually, that's enough of a question for me to put a question mark at the end of the sentence, and I'd love to hear you talk, and thanks for hearing me out on that exposition.
Okay, let me lead into this by saying the only reason that I even started thinking about this subject was because I read about it in David's book. And it's ironic because this was the question that was asked over and over and over and over and over again about possible futures and which one was more possible and which one wasn't possible and why this, why that. And I was beating my head against the wall trying to get people to understand that when you evaluate possibilities in a point in time, it's the possibility at that point in time. You can't understand how possibilities change as time changes, as decision-making changes, as things change. What looks like the most possible scenario now could look highly unlikely tomorrow because of a change, because the most likely possibility didn't happen. And it's very difficult to understand how many points of mathematics go into this process of determining possibilities. And if you determine possibilities at one point in time, you are eliminating chances of less likelier possibilities occurring and then reevaluating the possibilities from that point on. Very confusing stuff. Never could get the powers that be that wanted answers to the questions to understand that there's always a chance that the more or the less likely possibility happens, and then you have to reevaluate. And if you expand that out, you have to evaluate for millions of possibilities, and it's impossible. But as things happen, as you know what happens, you can then reevaluate and come to a conclusion about what's most likely going to happen. But you can't determine all the possibilities and the likelihood of every possibility. It's impossibly complicated.
Okay, I appreciate that very much, and I do understand what you're saying. At least I understand it as best as it's possible to understand it, I believe.
Trust me, it hurts my brain too, so.
No kidding. And the question that I have there about the variance and the examination of all of these possible variants of timeline 1 is that at what point in the history of studying this information that came out of the looking glass, this huge amount of information, was it known that whatever happened, there would be a convergence at the end of 2012? Even despite, for instance, with timeline 1 variant 83, there was going to be a huge nuclear war. It's like, was it known even then that there would be a convergence after that? Or was the convergence something that was only a possibility or a certain probability, but now, as we're getting closer to the end of 2012, we're in 2012 already, it's becoming more and more probable, because using your analogy of the moves in the chess game, maybe a few years back, there were kind of 20 moves left before checkmate, and now there are only 7 moves left, and by the time we get to October, there's only going to be 1 move left, maybe.
That's a very good explanation.
Okay.
When the game begins, all the possibilities exist. At the end of the game, there's certain things that have to happen for the game to end. And you inevitably get into this zone where, based on the rules of the game and the elimination of pieces and many, many other factors that people that play chess understand very well, you get when you get towards the end of the game, you can see how you can eliminate your opponent's choices by making certain moves. And that's always how the game ends.
I have a burning desire to say something here just very quickly, and that is that part of Dan Burrish's testimony, which he said several times, is that he tested the looking glass by saying, what happens if I want to see a catastrophe at this certain moment in time that they didn't have one visible before? And when he intended to see the catastrophe, there was a catastrophe that showed up in the lens of the looking glass. How did that gel with what you were saying, Bill?
That because of free will, you can always choose. One person can always make a single choice, but you have to remember that there's a lot of choices being made throughout the world. Everybody gets their free will. What the conclusion is that everybody starts making the same choices. There is a definite I guess convergence of thought or convergence of desire that seems to occur. And there's going to be no good explanation for this, I'm sorry. But with the right level of information and the right level of understanding, free will is exercised in a very one direction, one path fashion. If you understand the choices, you would inevitably only make one choice.
The way that I see this, just as a visual analogy to what I believe you're saying, it's a little bit like the free will of all the birds in a flock of birds, or all this fish in a school of fish who are swimming around and suddenly turning at the same time, because it's a matter of sort of resonance, for lack of any better word. It's a resonance issue, that it's like everyone's doing the same thing. And even in a partnership of two people, whether it's a business partnership or a marriage partnership, you can have that sort of, that state of being when people are flowing with each other, they're deciding the same thing, they're thinking the same thing, they're walking in the same pace, and there's no dissonance between them. And what I believe you're trying to describe is something where this is happening on a mass scale. Would that be in any way correct?
Yeah. Instinctively, intuitively, however you want to describe it, there's a part of us that knows where we're trying to go. And we don't know how to get there. So I try this direction, you try that direction, and Carrie goes that way. And we all figure out that we all went the wrong direction. But now we all know that those three directions don't lead to where we're trying to go. So those choices are eliminated.
So what happens if a soldier would have fired on unarmed civilians?
Explain.
Well, let's say that a soldier would be given a direct order to fire on unarmed civilians. Would he still make that choice based on this converging timeline that you're describing? Because you keep saying the right decision or the choices go in a certain predetermined direction.
Well, we can already see that in time because the consequences of soldiers firing on unarmed civilians has led to the Iraqi and Afghani veterans against war who are now speaking out against it. And everybody's hearing about the subject, and people's understanding that it's not just a video game and that there's feelings after these events, and you see the consequences long term afterwards. Just recently, there was a soldier that got a slap on the wrist for blowing 24 unarmed civilians away because one of his buddies got killed in an IED explosion. He didn't suffer criminal consequences for it, but now everybody's understanding of what happened has changed how we deal with that subject. Now soldiers are much, much more conscious of what they're doing and how it affects the world and the grand scheme of how we're actually destroying ourselves when we do this, because the perceptions of the world have changed against us. And, people that are not from America view these acts as horrendously barbaric. Americans are starting to see and understand these events on TV clearly, just like it was hard to understand everything before you saw Collateral Murder. But after you see and hear that pilot talking and watch those people literally coming apart when the shells hit them, and then seeing those two little girls being dragged out by soldiers, American soldiers, it changes you forever. And even when the soldiers watch it, it changes them forever. So you can see how this kill them all and let God sort them out attitude that was more popular when I was in the military is having a little bit of trouble existing right now. And more soldiers are speaking out and saying, we're not doing any good. We're wasting our time. We're just killing innocent people and, possibly creating another terrorist reaction. But certainly what we're doing is killing millions of people. So to answer your question, I think it's very easy to see the consequences of what's been happening over the past 4 years.
Well,
I want to ask another question here, if I could.
Okay.
The history. Once again, representing the probable questions of many people who've been following this testimony with enormous interest. And that is that the program for the construction of the deep underground bases, not only in America, but in Russia, many European countries, Australia, trillions of dollars have been spent on the largest construction project in human history ever since the early 1950s. And it strongly suggests that whoever it was who gave the orders to begin that construction project a very long time ago, probably in Eisenhower's era or even earlier, knew something that led them to make this enormous investment, this enormous military investment. And do you have any information about how early it was that these time portal devices were being used, whether it was Looking Glass or anything else? And what kind of information was being retrieved that early? And what decisions were made at that time that may have been at the start of the chess game rather than towards the end game? And
let me just stop you, Bill, because I can tell you right now, I have no idea. I only dealt with conclusions. And, how things came about and how they developed and why certain decisions were made was never part of what I did. It had nothing to do with the questions that I was being asked to answer.
Okay. And does that mean that you don't have any information either about where the Looking Glass came from and at what point it started to be used? You don't know that information?
Nope.
Okay. Are you able to say anything about the difference between the technology and the operation and the metaphysics, if you like, of the Looking Glass as compared to the Yellow Cube or the Yellow Book, or sometimes called the Orion Cube, which I believe is Kerry and I understand, is a unique device. There are many looking glasses. At least there are a number of looking glasses. There's only one of these yellow cubes, yellow books, or Orion cubes, which seems to have come, as we understand it, from a different race and operates on different principles. I wonder if you could speak to that, simply because I'm fascinated personally.
Okay, let me say that it was involved in my research because the similarities in how it worked, but both dealt with what I was dealing with, which is the convergence of the timelines. However, I will say that the Yellow Book didn't help me very much, because I quickly determined, as basically everybody else did, that it was heavily skewed in its operation due to lack of understanding. And so any conclusions that you tried to determine with it, you had to factor in who was using it. And when you don't have that information, you just kind of push it aside and eliminate it.
Yeah, let me just check my understanding of what you've said, which I think confirmed my earlier understanding, something that Kerry and I both understood earlier, which is that the Yellow Book is actually, it operates more subjectively, that the psychology or the intentions of the observer or the operator actually skew the results significantly more than the looking glass does. Is that correct? Have I understood that?
It seemed like, how do I say this? It seemed like it was looking glass based in its operation. However, I don't know, it just seemed like kind of a trick that made people believe what they wanted to believe. It seemed like somebody made something that would fool our understanding into thinking that we knew what the future was going to be, and inevitably skewed our believing, creating into making that happen. However, one person determining the future doesn't work, because, again, we all have free will, and you can't eliminate everybody else's choices and base all of the possibilities on just one person's decision-making or one person's free will. And that's why the Yellow Book seemed to be kind of a goof. Gotcha.
Okay. I have one more question, and then I want to hand over to Kerry, who's been admirably patient. And that is a question that many people must be wanting to be asked or asking themselves, and that is, do you have any information about what the chess moves might be this year before the metaphorical checkmate? Do you have any information at all about probable events this year before whatever this culminating event is that you've described happens towards the end of the year?
I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to do it in a way that is a little tough to understand. But the decisions that I've been making with my life to try to do what I am supposed to do to follow proper decision-making in my life has been to use my intuition. Now, at many times in the past year, my intuition has had seemingly negative consequences to my life. And In other words, I've lost a lot of personal things due to decisions that I've made that I intuitively think are the right choices. When I did my interview, I said there were 7 moves left in my example. Based on what I've talked about with David and another step and another decision that I've made since then, I'd say we're definitely one step closer. But I will say this, up until David and I talked, he and I were walking very parallel courses and had no idea that we were affecting each other's lives in a very distinct and definite way. And if, in hindsight, it's very easy to see that somebody has been giving me information and trusting that I would rely on good information and make good decisions. David's in a very similar situation. And when we talk today, or since we've talked from the interview, but we've talked pretty much every day, it's uncanny. The things that we can see that are making massive positive strides in the world in general. To answer your question, can I see the moves? My only true answer would be maybe. But I will tell you that even if I knew exactly what was going to happen throughout the course of the rest of the year, I wouldn't say anything. Because that would influence people's free will and possibly change the way things are happening. David and I have been making decisions independently of each other and got to a point where we figured out that because we didn't know that what each of us was doing, something very substantial has happened as of late. And it now very much looks more like that a very big change is going to happen that we both have believed for a very long time would happen. But it's easier to see now that there's probably something really big on the horizon based on what we've been through. And
we were both sworn to secrecy because we don't want the enemy to gain this information.
Exactly.
But the amount of information that correlated is off the frickin' chart.
Yeah. We don't understand the whole picture, but man, we have a big piece of the puzzle.
Okay, well, with all due respect to the men in this group, I want to say, okay.
One more question.
Wait, just a minute here. Okay, so Bill, one more question, and then what we would like to do is open it up to the audience, okay? And then at the end, I'll try to regroup and ask maybe a few final questions if they haven't been covered in the duration myself. But at this point, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to thank the audience for being patient as well. The question here, of course, that begs to be asked is whether your free will decision to give this interview and release this information actually constituted one of the chess moves.
Probably. I'm going to remain vague because I am doing things after this interview that are substantial.
I understand all of that. And thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your courage and your candor. Kerry, thank you.
Okay, very good. So at this point, we've got so many people that have been asking questions in the chat, and I am going to have to say that I'm going to go back through the chat. If you have a question and you have not put your question in all caps, then I'm going to ask you to retype it in caps, because I cannot discern from very quickly at this time whether something's a question or just a chat piece unless it's in all caps, so that I just distinguish between the two. And if you are chatting, please keep it out of all caps, although it looks like a lot of chat has actually gone into all caps, just maybe because people were excited or something. So I'm going to try to gather and grab questions here. And Tommy, who is my webmaster and should be listening and hopefully still awake, and thank you for being awake, Tommy, because it's very late probably in the morning at this point in Norway. But I'm going to ask you to retype into your Skype, because I have Skype on another computer, Tommy, where I'm able to see a question. So if you can pick and choose some questions and type them into the chat, that will also help me to determine what might be the greatest questions to ask. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to start grabbing questions, and people are typing very quickly. So, do you have knowledge of any ancient artifacts or technology? Okay, this is crazy, because the chat, you have to understand what's happening here. The chat, people are typing questions so fast that it just went out of my view. So let me ask you at least that part of the question. Do you have any knowledge of any ancient artifacts or technology, perhaps that relate to the Looking Glass? I can say that, and maybe it was mentioned already, the Sumerian seals is where the Looking Glass is supposed to have come from, in case you haven't been told that. But in that vein, do you have any knowledge of ancient technology on the planet Earth in any way?
I don't specifically have direct knowledge. No. I will say that on best guess, I don't want to call it ancient technology, advanced technology. I think there's, and I have had access to highly advanced, not unearthly, but advanced technology that we as human beings have produced via some means. I believe that a huge amount of technology, advanced technology, has been suppressed, so much so that the technology that exists today, if we knew everything that existed, would shock us beyond imagination. Certainly I've seen weaponry that could be used other ways that is just incredible, absolutely incredible.
Okay, I have another question here, and I'm going to try to go through the questions fairly quickly because we're going on for quite some time here. And one person is asking if timeline 1, or if there's a convergence of the timelines, does that mean that the reptilian agenda is eliminated?
I would have to understand what the reptilian agenda is. I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay.
It's a fairly common term that's an offshoot of David Icke's work, basically referring to the idea of satanic occult government and their efforts to reduce population.
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, sorry, if you would have just said, I call it timeline 2. It's a timeline 2 is a world where the few control the many, and choice is eliminated through fear, not any other way.
And you're saying that in the converging timelines, that no longer is the case.
It seems impossible, according to me and a lot of other people.
Okay. Okay. There is a person. Okay. Again, this is going too fast, you guys, and I don't know if Tommy's able to grab the questions better, but somebody is asking about disclosure, and I'm going to assume, because I couldn't read the whole question, that they wanted to know whether disclosure was going to happen in timeline 1. And what they mean by that, by disclosure, is not just disclosure of secrets, but disclosure of the, let's say, off-worlders or ET presence.
Wow, David,
I think that what
you want to help me answer this one, since
okay.
we just talked about it, and I don't want to give anything away? Yeah.
I think that the end, what you're describing and what we've been talking about and what I now know from stuff that we can't talk about is that the event that you have seen, disclosure is a joke compared to what's going to happen. It's so irrelevant that it's not even worth talking about anymore. Because what we're talking about is the energy that makes every subatomic particle in your body altering in a way in which any intelligent species in the universe that you wish to have knowledge of is yours to know at that moment.
Yeah. I will say that I do think disclosure is coming. I do think it's coming soon, but I don't think it's going to come in a way that anybody can possibly imagine right now.
Okay, it looks like somebody is asking, as a corollary to that, what is going to happen to our physical bodies? And did you see anything in that regard?
This is a conclusion, not knowledge, because nobody could answer this question with knowledge. But I think the changes are going to be so significant that we will transcend almost everything that we currently believe. I think we're going to figure out that we are pretty much, for all intents and purposes, living in an imaginary dream world that has little to do with reality, and when the sheer volume of truth comes out, it'll change everything.
The events that happen well before the end of this timeline and what that will do to people's consciousness,
Yes,
will change the fabric of reality based on the fact that we're in a thought-determined environment.
once we
Very
figure
true.
out, exactly, once we really figure out that we actually create what we believe, we're going to start believing in the things that we want to create. And that is going to be like magic to the world.
Well, I want to say one other thing, Bill, and that is that humans are all over the galaxy. I prove that in the book by showing that DNA is an emergent phenomenon from quantum mechanics. That being said, the human design is built for other stages of embodiment than the form that we now have in what, in some books like The Law of One, is called third density.
Yes.
It's my understanding that many of the people that have been visiting us, and I use the term people, even though most people would call them aliens, that's not accurate at all. In fact, it's very racist.
Don't like that word either.
Most of the people visiting us have already been through this. And time does not pose a barrier to their perception at that point.
Well, and I will add this. In most people's belief, we exist in a different density before we came here and when we die. It's not that hard to understand that we are a different density, and we're trying to break in, out, through. We're really trying to get someplace with this little project called Earth here.
Well, if you believe in reincarnation, why do we keep doing it? What are we, if you believe in spiritual growth, what are we growing towards? Do we just keep reincarnating over and over again? Or is there some sort of event that changes the game?
Okay, thank you. But at this time, if we can talk, thank you, David. I appreciate that. But I think that what we need is to let these questions come in and get the answers from Bill Wood. So
Carrie,
yeah.
I'm going to answer a question. I've gotten hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails.
Okay.
And though I haven't been able to answer most of them, I've read a lot of them. And one of the questions that I've been asked a lot is how I would suggest people go about developing their higher skills or their gifts. And first you have to understand what you believe reality to be is simply a basic understanding. So I'm going to try to shift people's reality a little bit here and get them thinking in a weird direction that'll give them some new ideas. David, you get a lot of credit for this one, buddy. When you dream, most people, from what I understand, can't remember their dreams or have trouble remembering their dreams when they wake up. David has gone to a lot of trouble to document his dreams so he could remember them. Ironically enough, that's something I did before I read his book. But then he talked about something that I did try, and it was a very interesting effect. Once you can remember your dreams, the next step is trying to figure out when you're dreaming. Because I think most people would accept that when you're dreaming, the dream is real. It's just as real as this reality that we're in right now. It's only when you wake up from the dream do you realize you are asleep. If you can find the ability to first remember your dreams, and then next realize that you're dreaming when you're sleeping, try then doing something that you wouldn't be able to do unless you were dreaming, something supernatural. I think people will find that's very easy to do.
Absolutely.
Because you realize it's not real, so you believe in your ability to do it. Once you do that, realize that it is very possible that the same effect, if you simply apply the same methods that you used in your dream world to this world, and you simply believe you can do it because you realize that you're asleep, quote unquote. Watch what happens. Pick something easy like your intuition and test it often. If you think somebody's thinking something, ask them what they're thinking. Exercise your abilities the same way you would exercise your body, because most of us don't ever think about trying things that we think are impossible. I'm not asking anybody to go out and do anything crazy or dangerous, but, just little things like, what do I think is going to happen tomorrow, and see what happens. But sincerely, you really have to believe in what you're doing. So if you can exercise your mind and your dreams and coincide the fact that it's only because you realize you're dreaming that you can do these impossible things that your mind will work the same way if you can realize that you don't have a good enough understanding to know that this isn't just as real or just as unreal as your dream world. So go ahead and believe, because believing in crazy stuff in your dreams doesn't hurt anything. So why not, try being able to use it here with the notion that you really don't know what's going on and what is reality. So maybe you can actually create what you believe, just like in your dreams.
There's a contribution which I'd like to make here, which is very, very relevant indeed. And this is something, Bill Wood, that you may not have heard before. It's an extract. It's a 1 minute and 6 second extract that I play at all of my presentations at every possible opportunity. I know that David Wilcock has heard this before. It's an interview on Coast to Coast by George Norrie of the UFO researcher Bill Burns, who was describing his testimony that he gained from Admiral George Hoover from the Office of Naval Intelligence. And what Bill Burns talks about in this 1 minute extract that I would like to play here is that the biggest secret is nothing other than the extraordinary level of classified human potential. And I just want to play this. This is 1 minute and 6 seconds, and it's worthwhile really, really understanding what this implies for us all.
What we don't know about the situation at Roswell is whether these were extraterrestrial, whether they came from a hollow earth, whether they came from another dimension. We don't know this, right?
We don't. The only clue that I had was from this naval officer. He was from the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, called George Hoover. We've talked about him before, who said that he was the Corso of the Navy, and that the military believed, and he said he knew, that these entities were not so much interplanetary, but they were literally time travelers. And the big secret is that they were us from the future, and that we and they had the same powers, and that was the real fear of the government, that we had the ability to manipulate reality around us. We've always had that ability, we just didn't know how to use it, and if we ever learned how to use it, and we're not ready for it, we would cause chaos, and that was the big secret that the Navy eventually found out.
And let me couple on the end of that and suggest that the world is the way it is today because it is exactly what we collectively as a race believe in. Think about it. But the way most people believe is the reality of the world. If we start changing our beliefs, if we really start realizing our potential, if we really start thinking that, wow, if I just was always positive and hopeful all the time, the world would change around me, you'd love it. You would absolutely love it.
Okay, thank you. And that's something that I always talk about at my whenever I address conferences as well, which is that you have to understand that we have all the same powers that the so-called ETs, the visitors, have, that we just simply don't realize it or acknowledge it. Okay, there is another question here. Does 2012 have anything to do with the galactic superwave that Paul LaViolette spoke about? And I don't know if you know who Paul LaViolette is. I don't know if you've heard the term superwave.
No, but we've already touched on it. It's this bombardment of energy, or these micro wormholes that affect the density of everything on this planet. And by affecting the density, you affect reality.
Okay, and Paul Laviolette said it came from the center of the galaxy. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that?
Center of the galaxy, in alignment with our solar system and the sun. A lot of factors come into it, but yes, there is something about the center of the galaxy that sends out this metamorphic kind of changing energy, and it has been scientifically proven. And if you doubt that, then go and figure out why the CERN project exists, and then listen to the guy who is the foremost person in string theory, the foremost physicist in string theory, and listen to what he says about the CERN project and what it has to do with the events that are coming up.
Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to say. Okay. Another question here is, and this may, in a certain sense, have been answered already, at least partially. The question is, what will it look like when the game is finished?
Nobody can answer that question right now. And the one thing that I would tell everybody is you should really not try to find that knowledge. You should try to empty yourself of any conclusions, because you really need to allow for the most miraculous possibilities to be available. You need to be an empty vessel. So when things happen, you can accept the changes, because they're going to come fast. And it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose at some point, and you're going to have to figure out how to do it.
Okay, I now have a more specific question that had to do with ancient artifacts. What they were actually asking was, do you have any awareness of what was removed from Iraq?
No. I have no knowledge of it, nor do I want to draw any conclusions. I will tell you there is a lot of fascinating sea stories that people love telling about the subject, and lots of things that I've heard, but I would rather not draw any conclusions or lead anybody else into any conclusions.
Okay, well, let me ask you, because in a sense, you are an intuitive and something of a remote viewer. Are you aware of a Stargate in Iraq, and are you aware of Stargates around the planet? You might want to call them portals.
I will say this. We are given reasons for why we run into countries and invade them and remove people from power. I would say we rarely get the truth of why.
Okay, well, I can say it for you. I mean, you know, I know you're trying to skirt this question, so let me say that we have ample information that there is a war over the Stargates on planet Earth. Okay. And I guess what I'm asking you is if you have gotten any other knowledge or internal knowledge because of being part of the Looking Glass Project or anything else that you did in Iraq, for example.
Okay. I will say this. I already said it to David, and he thought it was cool. So everybody has seen the show, the TV show Stargate, right? I think the coolest thing about that show is the fact that the 100th, 200th, and 300th episodes talk about the Stargate program having a TV show based on the Stargate program. What's the name of it, David?
Wormhole Extreme.
Wormhole Extreme. I think that is the most ironically hilarious, say it out loud, can't believe they would ever let that shit happen funny thing. You can draw conclusions after that. Like David has said, there's an element of truth in every lie, but there's an element of lie in every truth too. So,
well, the closing credits of every episode, right? We talked about that.
Oh yeah.
It says that it was with the cooperation of the U.S. Space Command. They put it right out there in front of your face, every episode.
And I will point out one other thing. Does everybody really think that we shut down our only space program, the shuttle program, and we have nothing in our arsenal to get into space now? We're totally dependent on other countries to get into space. Do you really think that? Come on. Without giving anything away, come on.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else that I can grab here.
Oh, there is one more thing.
All right.
Area 51. Here's what I'll say about that. Let's get 1 million people together and walk over there and take a look. They can't shoot us all. Because we need to know what is in that place. We need to know. It's important, and it leads us to believe a lot of fairy tales that need to be eliminated. So we should make a concerted effort to figuring out the question to what is at Area 51. Because I can tell you, and 1 million people will say I'm bullshit liar. So let's all go take a look together. That way 1 million people will know.
We have Occupy Area 51. The
Absolutely.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting.
Let me say this. In my latest piece, Financial Tyranny, in which a lot of the stuff that Bill and I have been kind of hinting at is very evident if you read the piece. I talk about the 2010 United States Department of Defense budget. Once you strip away pension and atomic stuff, and then you look at the defense contractors and how much money they got, you're left over with an unaccountable $561 billion. What the hell are they spending this money on per year?
And right before 9/11, Dick Cheney announces that the Defense Department lost $2.3 trillion with a T. Come on. That money's going somewhere. And it's buying a lot of stuff. Why? What? How? Answer.
Okay, well, I don't know if I asked you this in the interview. I might have, so if we're going over that material again, tell me. But bases on the Moon and Mars, are you aware of them? Have you had any interaction or any exposure to those?
I did give an answer, but I will re-give it. Get a good telescope and look with your eyes and tell me what you see. Do you see things that look terrestrial? They may not be fun places to live, but they probably look like they exist. And it's only because we don't look that we don't see. I can promise you that.
Okay, and when you were being trained at Area 51, for those of you that did hear the interview, did you ever go on one of those underground trains that go very quickly? I think it's called maglev, although I don't know if that's the only kind. Like, for example, from Area 51 to Pine Gap in an hour or something.
I'm not going to answer that question, but I will give you some information that will satisfy the questioner. Look online Google laser drill. You will see a picture of a bunch of people standing in front of something that looks like the drill that dug the tunnel from London to France. But it digs at a rate of 7 miles per day. Can you imagine how much hole we could make at 7 miles per day in a year, in 2 years, in 10 years?
And who said we only built one either?
Oh, use your imagination, because all of that information is real and out there. There's pictures of the equipment, maybe not using it, but looking at the front of that thing, you see that there's no drill bits in it. And you can only imagine what nice, shiny, glassy surface is left behind when you heat rock up that fast and cool it that fast. And since I know just a little bit about lasers, I'm going to say that is easy to understand. So go take a look at that. Then, do the math.
This is
7
something
times 365 times 10. Tell me how many tunnels that makes.
This is something that Dr. Richard Sauder has published a lot of information about, which we would recommend anyone to take a look at. I think the speed that he referenced in the research that he had done was up to 18 miles per day. And so there you go, that's nearly 3 times as fast. And goodness knows how fast these things are now at the speed of technological advance.
Well, and I came up with 7 miles based on what I determined that a piece of equipment that size of what I know exists in laser technology could do. You haven't lived until you've seen an ND-YAG laser operate at 100 watts. Imagine one that operates at 1,000,000 watts. 100-watt ND-YAG laser will shatter a concrete block in a couple of seconds by heating it up. And it literally just pounds away like it pulses, so it looks like a drill. And it just clears material like effortless. It's very incredible.
Okay, I have somebody who's asking a question which I think maybe you needed to clarify. You sort of started a part of this discussion by talking about how you were having trouble with your intuition. In other words, or I think to reword that, you were saying that your intuition was getting you in trouble this year. And the person, I think, wanted to understand a little more, why were you saying that?
Okay, I'll say it this way. If you exercise and you don't understand that you're going to be sore after you exercise, you'll probably quit after you get sore. If you know in your mind that you will get past the soreness and you will be happy with the development after that, and it's that long-term goal that you have to focus on and not the short-term pain. If I chose to focus on the short-term pain in my life right now, I would probably want to kill myself, figuratively speaking. But I focus on the long-term goals. And I focus on the fact that long-term goals seem to be getting much, much closer.
Okay, well, I want to say in that regard that what happens is what I think, in a sense, you're saying, is that what may look like a bad intuitive decision today, in the long run, is going to actually benefit you and be a good decision. But at this moment in time, it may not look that way or even feel that way. And that is often the case with intuition. And another way of saying that is that that something very bad can turn into something very good ultimately.
Well, I can tell people exactly what's happening. When everybody that you love and care about thinks you're absolutely insane because of the decisions you are making, if they prove out that you were 100% right, even though it seemed insane at the time, hey, what should I be doing, really? Well, very recently, my insanity has proven out in a pretty major way, and I know David knows what I'm talking about, because I have trusted my intuition in some pretty crazy ways, and now I have some pretty significant information and help that says otherwise. And I'm very excited about that.
I commend you for the bravery that you had and the steps that you took, considering how little about this you were made aware of compared to what you've now been made aware of, and the fact that you now know that you made those decisions properly.
Right, because I had to make some pretty crazy choices before somebody came along and said, you are dead on right. I am going to give you tremendous amount of support for your determinations and your decisions. Thank you. And it's not David telling me that. It's somebody that has some real juice in this world.
Well, I just got the handshake for you, but it was very important that we do that.
Well, and David has been a huge part of it, and he's been putting himself out in the same way. And
we all
getting
have.
the same kudos, yeah.
I mean, I hope that the people who watch this video realize that every one of us are laying our lives on the line, our health on the line. This is not something in which any of us are making exceptional profit. This is an effort that could get us tortured, could get us killed, has led to extreme public humiliation, ridicule. Many people love to spout off vitriol and hate towards us every day. But the reason why we're doing this, if I may speak for the collective, is that we see that the world needs our help, and we are willing to step up where others are too afraid to put a public face and a public name behind their highest aspirations for where we need to go as a planet.
I very much agree.
And I thank you, Bill, for doing that, and I thank you, Carrie and Bill Ryan, also, because without you guys, so much of what's happened in my life wouldn't have happened. I mean, the fact that you guys did Project Camelot, it broke open the door. You have the best collection of interviews of anything out there on the internet of its kind. It still stands to this day as second to nothing. And I believe that although it's several moves down the road, I think we will be vindicated this year absolutely unequivocally and on a very widespread, undeniable basis.
And I would agree with you 100% because I was ultimately blindly guided to Carrie and David as resources. And now I know exactly why I was told to talk to you two.
Yeah.
Because something very significant has happened. I can't talk about it, but it's something very significant.
Okay, well, that's great to hear. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to see if there are any last questions that kind of haven't been dealt with in any way, shape, or form. Some of the questions that are going through here have been sort of answered in various ways. So I will encourage the people who are listening who think their question wasn't answered to go back once we close down here. And actually, also, I'm praying that this is being recorded by more than one device simultaneously here. so that if we do have any kind of weird failures, not encouraging that, but just any glitches, that we get more than one copy of this out there. But that your question may have been answered in the duration of this discussion, because there were quite a few things said that were quite complex and included many things in one answer. What I'm being asked to say is that there is a hidden war of epic proportions going on at this moment. And as a corollary to that, I wonder if you can address how much of that do you feel that you tapped into during the time when you were asked to look at Looking Glass? In other words, when you looked at Looking Glass, which was back in, I'd say 1992, correct me if I'm wrong, or 97?
It would pinch me to say when. It was later, but
okay. But what I'm asking is, were you when you saw into the future, right? You were looking into the future. I never used the Looking Glass. I investigated. I'm talking about your remote viewing, your intuitive ability. Your visualization, okay. Abilities to see. You were using your second sight, however you want to term that. So when you did so, did you see a war going on prior to the converging timelines, such that is going on at this time? It's more difficult than that. My viewings lead me to investigate. My investigations lead to information. I go looking for things and I find the answers. There's a lot of good information in the world, and you can sift through the bullshit very quickly if you truly use your belief in the fact that you can determine, or fate will give you what you need at any time in your life. If you can just trust enough that, there's something going on in the world that makes seemingly impossible things happen in such insignificant ways that most people look right past them or override their intuition and say, no, that's crazy, I won't do that. Okay, but what I'm asking, that's not actually the question. The question is actually more about your visualization. And I'm trying to tell you, you're mischaracterizing that ability. Okay, but did you see anything visually? In other words, do you see pictures or do you only get information? No, it's steps. I don't close my eyes and see into the future. I look and I find it. Okay, but if you look, you have to look at something and you have to find something. So do you see something visual or not? You know what I mean by visualization? You're making it too simple. You can't do that. Because I'll just say, no, it doesn't work that way. But also, it does work that way. I get flashes. That's what I'm asking. That seem insignificant, seem like random traces or random thoughts. Right. But they are actually direction. They are actually information. You need to figure out what it means most of the time, but yeah, it's visual. I can feel when somebody is concentrating their thought on me. I can very much feel when somebody is negatively concentrating their thought on me. I could even give you a very good example of somebody who is probably watching
this live stream. Her name is Ava. We've talked a couple of times in emails, but I've asked her a couple of questions, and we connected. We have something. We've been talking, but not with words. It's fun. It's, not trivial, but not, where we're, sitting there having long conversations and brushing each other's hair.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, because I'm watching the questions go by, I'm trying to grab what I can here. Someone is asking, do you think Congress knows what you're talking about? In other words, do you think, and I guess because in essence, you did this for the military, you came up with certain conclusions and you fed those conclusions to the military. And in essence, what you're talking about now, this converging timelines, is what you saw. And in theory, I'm assuming what you told them you saw, right?
Congress, that's a delicate subject. Let me say this. If one day you believe that you can do anything, get away with anything, break any law, hurt any person, and get away with it, and you do that over and over and over again, that you are so drunk on power that you don't even think about it when you do it anymore, and then you wake up one day and somebody is putting handcuffs on you and putting you in jail and saying, "What the hell have you done?" And you can't even imagine how hard that is to understand if you don't have any experience with it whatsoever, because you're one of those people that has a soul and has humanity and would never dream of ever hurting people in any kind of way. Trust me, there is extremes to power. And I know for a fact that people have taken these extremes in money and power to beyond comprehension. But eventually the circle comes all the way around and everybody sees the truth. Just like we've seen the truth about weapons of mass destruction. Just like we've seen the truth about lots of other things. I'm not going to go into details, but, watch the movie Thrive and tell me that doesn't speak to everybody that truly looks at it and watches it all the way to the end. And at the end, when you hear people talking about the way the world could be if we just wanted it to be that way, that there is significant evidence of unlimited energy that's easily obtainable, and we could give it to everybody if money wasn't an issue. If people didn't need to be in power, how different this world would be. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I guess we've been going for almost 3 hours at this point. So I think that we probably should wrap it up. I did want to go for close to 3 hours, and I guess we've achieved that within 5 minutes. If there's anyone here that wants to ask any last questions or make a statement, and very specifically you, Bill Wood, because,
I definitely want to make a statement. So
yeah.
okay.
So why don't we allow you to do that? But before you make your statement, if there's any burning questions that Bill or David have, that they feel just haven't had a chance to ask, I've tried to comb the questions of the audience sufficient, and I believe I've done that sufficiently to get most of the ones that at least I could find and see. Is there something that you want to ask at the end here, understanding that we're drawing to a close?
I'd just like to thank Bill for his courage once again. I think this is possibly pivotal, and I'm most drawn by the importance of everything that we're talking about here. It's resonating through every core of my being. I don't think I'm alone with that. I think this is profoundly significant. I think it would be wonderful, may I just suggest, if we could maybe reconvene, take a rain check and take a look and see how everything's progressing and how many chess moves are we further towards the checkmate, maybe in about a month's time. How about that?
Okay.
Choice?
Sounds like a very good possibility. Okay, David, is there any last thing that you want, a burning question or a statement?
Yeah, okay, statement. I had dreams of UFOs when I was 2. I had meetings with people in them in my dreams. It became Obi-Wan Kenobi after I saw Star Wars. I had an out-of-body when I was 5. I began reading ESP books when I was 7, began practicing the exercises. I developed that talent in lucid dreaming in high school. I then found out UFOs were real in 1992, 93. And since that time, I have been absolutely dedicated to this investigation. I was investigating ESP since I was 7, as I said. What has happened is I culminated 30 years worth of research into writing source field investigations. There's some very intriguing stuff that's happening on that front. Very recently, in fact, today, I have news that just came in. It's very exciting. However, in all of the stuff that I've done, I didn't really see how the pieces fit together or exactly where we were going. Approximately 3 weeks ago, I was given a briefing, and then soon after that, a more detailed briefing. And it's the most substantial information that I've ever heard, because it actually shows how we're going to get through this. Not a fairy tale, not a wannabe story, not channeling, not divine intervention, not extraterrestrials coming down on this planet, but the people who love us, the people who've pledged their lives because they love us, who we've almost completely forgotten about, who we've dishonored, who we think they're all in on it. I had no idea how much they love us and the extent of what is going on and has gone on, and how terrible it must have felt for them to have been completely covert. That it was the only way that it would work. The conversations that Bill and I have had are such a game changer that I haven't really had time to process it yet. But to find out that the briefings that I had 3 weeks ago are staggeringly accurate, and to have the people behind that alliance ask this brave man to come forward and put a face and a name to something that up until now was basically only Benjamin Fulford and me talking about this particular issue. Now, there are other issues that are corollary and are similar, but I'm talking about a very specific through line, which has now been emphatically validated. And then over and above that, to further have the validation of his experience in Looking Glass and what really happens at the end of this year, and seeing the pieces all fit together and realizing, my God, this is real. This is actually going to happen. And I see not all of it, but I get a pretty good idea what this year is going to be like. And it is absolutely amazing. And so, Bill, I want to thank you for your valor and your courage and your honor to the people of this planet, that you have pledged your life in service. And for me as a person, the gratitude that I feel is beyond measure. And I hope that some of the initiatives that I have now originated for you will help to repay some of that gratitude that I feel.
Well, you better than anyone know it's going to, because it already has. So thank you. And I will say that people want to know, when are things going to happen? When are changes going to happen? When are we going to start seeing things? I will say this. What I've been through in the past week since I did the interview has been a game changer. Maybe not anybody can see it right now, but I know that if I was an elite and I found out tomorrow morning about this interview, I would be petrified, because I would know that it's over, that people are figuring it out, they're becoming aware, they're having hope, and there's nothing that can be done about it anymore, because things are happening. It would be absolutely ideal in this chess game if we didn't have to play out the final moves to prove that we know we've won, that the good guys have beat the bad guys. I wish and pray that the elites, the Bilderbergs, the people that we hear and know about, but most laugh and say, "Oh, that's just too wild. It must be a conspiracy." It's not. It's sad and it's true. And I'm very, very hopeful now, with what I know and what I'm going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, with the help and support that I now have because of the things that I have been doing. There are some real big, high up, informed people that are acknowledging that things are happening. It's not just me. It's not just David. And these people know things. They have helped us fill in the blanks that we were starting to put together. And some real cooperation is coming of it. So let's tell the elites in our meditations tonight, when we're creating the perfect world in our dreams and imagining it and hoping for it, to tip their king over and let the end be. And they know that all we care about is getting to this point in time where what's real becomes reality, and the illusion that they perpetuate to stay in power is not dying, it's dead.
Well, and it could mean the difference between a catastrophic death and an honorable discharge from the role of power that they had, because we're not advocating genocide. We don't want there to get to the point where it's a night of long knives.
Nope.
But that could be what it is, depending on the choices that they're going to be making in the very near term. And if you come to my website in the next couple days, it's going to be even clearer what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Because of, yeah. And I just want to say that what I now know about this plan, it is magnificently well orchestrated, and it is spectacularly more complex in its execution than I had ever possibly understood. And I absolutely will not go into detail, because I don't want anything to get in the way of this working exactly the way it's been planned.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I think that we are also tipping our hats to the white hats behind the scenes in a lot
Yes.
of what you're saying. So I will put it that way. Because above and beyond the collection of group that you are referring to, there are other white hats who perhaps are not known to even them, but actually deserve our thanks as well for mirroring us on that side of the game, so to speak, and the more covert side. And so at this point, I'd like to close this down. Thank you very much, Bill Wood, David Wilcock, Bill Ryan, and the audience for being there, and for all the wonderful people that have sent in contributions to help keep Camelot going. I encourage you to help support Avalon, which is Project Avalon, which is what Bill is now really head up of. And David's work, divinecosmos.com. And also, please put the word out and sign the petition for as protest against the NDAA, not because petitions have exactly the kind of impact that we would like them to have, but because it is by signing the petition that you will send a message to the very so-called powers that were that a change is afoot. And we need to keep sending those letters and making those statements for the rest of the year, as a matter of fact. So thank you very much. Please stay tuned to Project Camelot, Project Avalon, and DivineCosmos.com for updates in all of these regards, as you have done in the past, and you should continue to do. And thank you for all your work. I know we've got a lot of white hats listening. I know we've got a lot of people that have done wonderful things that maybe are not acknowledged. And I just want to thank you for whatever work you have done towards a positive future for humanity. And thank you, Bill Wood, for your contribution in this regard.
Well, thank you. And I want to ask everybody that's still here and listening, tomorrow morning, first thing, one random act of kindness. Just do it. I promise. It'll change the world.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Okay, now I have to figure out how to turn this off.